Blake Lovell and Chris Lee of Southeastern 14 here to react to Auburn's season-ending loss to Houston in the NCAA tournament. Your final from Birmingham, Houston 81, Auburn 64. That was a tale of two halves. Auburn led by 10 at the break, and my goodness, Kelvin Sampson really got his team's attention at halftime. Houston's defense was some of the best that I've ever seen. Now, Auburn didn't help by missing shots, particularly free throws. John Broome couldn't buy one for anything. But I was worried about the injuries to Houston. Jamal Shedd and Marcus Sasser. Shedd scored 10 points. Kelvin Sampson had said his knee was not in great shape, and Sasser was one I was really worried about. Pulled a groin muscle that was heavily wrapped. Didn't matter. He scored 22 points, moved about pretty well. Houston, Blake, showed why it was the pre-tournament favorite to win the entire event. And Auburn continued to flash some of the same things that gave Auburn issues all year when things didn't go quite as well, I think, as maybe we expected coming into the year.
Yeah, I mean, look, we gave Auburn a chance because we said the problem was that you just didn't know, how much Sasser would play. If he did play, you didn't know what percentage he would play at. And we talked about the Shedd injury and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I did point out, I said, look, they can say that, he's dealing with an issue, but he played, 36 minutes against Northern Kentucky or whatever it was. So I think that's why, as we talked about in the preview, if you were making the case for Auburn, seemed to be a lot of things aligning just in terms of how they played in game one, games in Birmingham. Obviously, that's been talked about a million times now. And it was just the unknowns with the injury situation because let's call it what it is. I mean, Houston did not look great in game one against Northern Kentucky, but they managed to win. But this was where if you're Auburn and you're looking at this matchup and what worries you for sure, it was exactly what you saw in the second half because this is why Houston was the betting favorite to win the whole thing because that's what we are used to seeing from a team like this. And again, that's what I said. We talked about the injuries and all that, but man, you're never going to discount Kelvin Sampson's ability to get his team in the right spot. Now, it didn't happen in the first half, but boy, did he get them in the right spot in the second half. They turned up the defense, and man, it was it was impressive to watch. I know Auburn fans didn't find it impressive to watch, but I think just from a an outside observer standpoint, I mean, they were something, and that's why again they can win this whole thing. And sure, Auburn has themselves to blame with some of this. I mean, you can't go 19 of 36 from the free throw line and win an NCAA tournament game against the number one seed. That's going to be a hard thing to do, no matter how well you play elsewhere. You cannot give up 17 free points. And of course, they lost by 17. No guarantee they're going to go 36 of 36 or anything, but you just can't leave that many opportunities on the table. And honestly, Chris, I think that's kind of what the theme has been. We talked about Princeton, Missouri, a lot of, empty possessions, leaving a lot on the table. For Auburn, empty possessions in the form of a free throw. And just you can't afford to do that in these kind of survive and advance type games. And Houston was the better team in the second half, and that was the difference.
Other than the free throws, I honestly thought this was more about Houston than it was Auburn. I mean, Houston just rotates so quickly on defense and gets to shooters and gets bodies on guys inside. They play fast. They play physical. They play 100% pretty much at all times. They're just, I'll tell you, they're a joy to watch play basketball.
Yeah, they're a Kelvin Sampson team. They're exactly as advertised. This is what they do. Like everything that they do well, you saw in the second half. Like they can do a lot of things well, but specifically when they decide they want to lock in defensively, you're going to have a hard time getting a good look. And I mean, look, this was also well talked about all season. We said it. I mean, Auburn's just this team offensively was never going to have the ceiling that last year's team had when you just talked about it off. I mean, even some of the more recent successful Auburn teams, there were always going to be questions, I think, about this team offensively. Now they started to shoot the ball better from three down the stretch, and we started thinking, okay, well, maybe they're starting to put something together here. But yeah, it's just, you're doing it against a defense like this, right? And as we said, if Houston was not at full strength, if Sasser doesn't play, if he's not, whatever, it's different. It is probably different. It's a little bit different. But with all those guys out there on the floor, that's what I guess we should have did a version that way too, Chris, in the preview, because if we'd have did the version that said you're going to give me Houston's entire lineup out there, basically. Now they have guys in foul trouble and all that, but if you're going to give me them at their best, that's not a great matchup for Auburn, and it's because Auburn has struggled to make shots consistently at times. And something else I talked about, it's just, I mean, it's a team that that first half it was all there, but you've got to put together a complete game in this kind of setting. You have to have a complete 40 minutes to win, and Auburn pretty much left it all out there first half. It was, you couldn't have drew it up much better, but second half was just sort of the complete opposite.
Yeah, I thought Auburn had a chance, given that the game was in Birmingham, and given that I didn't think Houston would be at full strength. But in the end, the first didn't seem to matter, and in the second, I think we maybe overestimated Houston's health issues. Although
We just
I've
didn't
said
know.
before,
I mean,
you don't know. I mean, Kelvin Sampson himself had said the knee injury to Shed was not good, and having had a pulled groin muscle before, I could tell you those take a while to heal, and that could be something that pops up later in the tournament too. I hope not, because again, that Houston team is a joy to watch. Love the way it plays, and I'd love to see what it can do at full strength, because frankly, Blake, it could be there cutting down the nets in the end in Houston.
Oh, sure could. Yeah, I mean, we only have what we have to go on at the time. We record these things. We do a pretty quick turnaround to where, we're not recording these day of, so it's hard to know exactly, and especially when you have injuries like that to a number one seed, significant injuries. Um, you try to craft a plan for the underdog and say, here's how they could do it now that we know this, or now that there's an unknown here or there. And so yeah, we try to do that with Auburn, but like I said, first half it was all there, and they had connected kind of all the dots that you needed to do to beat a team like Houston. But second half was just all about Houston stepping up defensively, and just a remarkable half of defense. But I think if you're Auburn too, you're going to look back at this game and didn't shoot well from three. I mean, we talked about it, like that was just kind of something I think that was eventually in this kind of game where if you're chasing, you need to have that element. And though they shot it better down the stretch this season, that was always something that I think, especially against a team like Houston, it just doesn't give you a lot of good looks. Um, Not being able to knock down shots from the perimeter is just a tough thing. And, you just can't go 19 to 36 from the free throw line. That's not going to get it done. Like I said, Broome just happened to have one of those games where, I mean, that's the thing in the tournament, right? It's just because it is a one game elimination setting, you just cannot afford to have some of those things happen at the wrong time. And that was one of those examples. Because really, look at it, Chris. I don't know what was he shooting percentage wise on the season from the free throw line. I have to look it up
I
here.
think it was under 60. I could be wrong.
I don't think it was that bad.
Well, they look bad tonight. They were all line drives.
Shot about 60%. Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, shot about 60%, and so yeah, it just was not there. So tough finish for the Tigers, but I don't know that they were. I think you probably look back at it as a season that felt a little underwhelming, just in a sense because of all the, especially with like we said, they came in the tournament losing 9 of 13, but I think overall the weaknesses or the flaws that were there were probably ones we could have identified before the season started. We just didn't know, I guess, how much that would impact them relative to the rest of the SEC. And I think that was just always the thing, is maybe you could see some of those, but you still feel like they were ahead of this team or ahead of that team. But, you wind up having teams like A&M and Missouri and, I mean, of course, Alabama at the top, but, they kind of push ahead a little bit there, and that just makes it a lot tougher. So, yep, man, it's a 40-minute game, and Houston was just so much better in those final 20 minutes that that was enough to win it. So,
Well, I feel bad. I feel like I shouldn't say we pick on Wendell Green Jr. and KD Johnson a lot. We don't mean to pick on them, but ultimately, guard play is going to determine where Auburn gets. And those guys just were good guards, but they weren't great. And I think that's the difference between maybe this Auburn team and some of Bruce Pearl's best teams, was just the ability to get great guard play. And those guys just never quite got Auburn where it wanted to go.
Well, and and even great guard play against Houston is
they can
probably
make great guards look good or bad.
It's probably still not going to be as good as Houston. Like that's the problem, because again, that group of guards is just, even if you're pretty good and having your best game, it's going to be a challenge. And if you're not, then we saw what can happen. So yeah, well, again, we'll talk more about Auburn kind of as we go into the off season, because we'll kind of look back at some of these teams and do sort of our state of the program as we did with football. But yeah, it's kind of I think a disappointing season overall, just because of the struggles down the stretch. I mean, remember, this is a team that was 16-3 at one point, and finishes 21-13. So you can do the math on that, and I think there was just a lot of offensive consistency, and that can be the difference in games like these. So.
Okay, we are going to preview and review every game in the NCAA tournament, involving SEC teams. Best way to catch all those, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. That helps our analytics. He's Blake Lovell. I am Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris. We'll see you again.